Paranormal Dimensions is a regular feature on Mondays on the Paranormal UK radio network. Any opinions or comments made by any guest are their own, and they do not necessarily reflect any of the presenters or network's opinions.
Hello, this is Nick Pope, and you're listening to the Paranormal UK radio network, the UK's biggest paranormal network. And this is Paranormal Dimensions with David Young.
Going to be definitely interesting, something you don't want to miss.
Hello and welcome to the show. I hope everyone's doing well out there. As we all look forward to the summer with the clocks changing, I've got another fantastic guest for you today. He first appeared on the 4th of May on show number 64. It's Terry Lovelace. On the previous show, he was talking about his book, Incident at Devil's Den. Now this show, he's back to talk about his new book, which is called Devil's Den, The Reckoning. So we will be hearing all about his new book. Just before that, I have to say thank you for the messages, as usual, that I get. Now, I've had a lot of comments coming in about a track I played called A Homage to Chief Seattle by a friend of mine named Preston Williams. He's a Canadian singer-songwriter, and it seems like, lots of people have been asking to hear it again. I've already played it a couple of times on previous shows. So, if you haven't heard this, or even if you have, it's actually worth another listen. It's a wonderful track. Very spiritual, very thought-provoking, and especially, as I've said before, in today's world, which I think everyone needs to think about. Please give it a listen.
The great chief in Washington sends word that he wishes to buy our land. The great chief also sends us words of friendship and goodwill. This is kind of him, since we know he has little need of our friendship in return. But we will consider your offer, for we know that if we do not sell, the white men may come with guns and take our land. How can you buy or sell the sky, the warmth of the land? The idea is strange to us. If we do not own the freshness of the air and the sparkle of the water, how can you buy them? Every part of this earth is sacred to my people. Every shining pine needle, every sandy shore, every mist in the dark woods, every clearing and every humming insect is holy in the memory and experience of my people. The sap which courses through the trees carries the memories of the red man. So when the great chief in Washington sends word that he wishes to buy our land, he asks much of us. Whatever befalls the earth befalls the sons of the earth. Man did not weave the web of life, he is merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. But we will consider your offer to go to the reservation you have for my people. We will live apart and in peace. It matters little where we spend the rest of our days. Our children have seen their fathers humbled in defeat. Our warriors have felt shame, and after defeat they turn their days in idleness and contaminate their bodies with sweet foods and strong drinks. It matters little where we spend the rest of our days. They are not many. A few more hours, a few more winters, and none of the great tribes that once lived on this earth or that now roam in small bands in the woods will be left to mourn the graves of a people once as powerful and hopeful as yours. But why should I mourn the passing of my people? Tribes are made of men, nothing more. Men come and go like the waves of the sea. Even the white man whose God walks and talks with him as friend to friend cannot be exempt from the common destiny. One thing we know which the white man may one day discover: our God is the same God. You may think now that you own him as you wish to own our land, but you cannot. He is the God of man, and his compassion is equal for the red man and the white. This earth is precious to him, and to harm the earth is to heap contempt on its creator. The whites too shall pass, perhaps sooner than all other tribes. Continue to contaminate your bed, and you will one night suffocate in your own waste. But in your perishing you will shine brightly, fired by the strength of the God who brought you to this land and for some special purpose gave you dominion over this land and over the red man. That destiny is a mystery to us, for we do not understand when the buffalo are all slaughtered, the wild horses are tamed, and the view of the ripe hills blooded by talking wires. Where is the thicket? Gone. Where is the eagle? Gone. And what is it to say goodbye to the swift pony and the hunt, the end of living and the beginning of survival? So we will consider your offer to buy the land. If we agree, it will be to secure the reservation you have promised. There perhaps we may live out our brief days as we wish. When the last red man has vanished from this earth, and his memory is only the shadow of a cloud moving across the prairie, these shores and forests will still hold the spirits of my people. For they love this earth as a newborn loves its mother's heartbeat. So, if we sell our land, love it as we've loved it. Care for it as we've cared for it. Hold in your mind the memory of the land as it is when you take it. And with all your strength, with all your mind, with all your heart, preserve it for your children and love it as God loves us all. One thing we know: our God is the same God. This earth is precious to him. Even the white man cannot be exempt from the common destiny. We may be brothers after all. We shall see.
Preston Williams. He's a Canadian singer-songwriter who lives in London. I think he deserves a lot more notice. His album's available, by the way. It's called 8 Mile Stare. Now, as always, if anyone wants to get in touch with me, if anyone wants to ask for that track again, it's David Young, 2QN at yahoo.co.uk. David Young, 2QN, all one word, at yahoo.co.uk. And I don't mind playing it again if anyone wants to ask for it again. Okay, let's get on with today's show. Today's show is with Terry Lovelace. It's great to have Terry back on the show. So, here we go. Hello, Terry. Welcome back to Paranormal Dimensions.
Hi, David. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm absolutely proud to have you back on, Terry. And I just mentioned to you off air. You were on show number 64 on the 4th of May previously. This show is now number 108. Time seems to have flown by. And in other ways, it seems to have crept by. Well, what was a bad year we've had? But
yeah, both are true. And congratulations on the shows. That's a lot to rack up.
Yeah,
I mean, a lot of interviews.
I'm actually surprised because I never thought it would get through. Probably about half a dozen shows. But they seem to be doing all right.
Yeah, you got a great show. You got a great host. You got a great guest. Yes.
Oh, we had some great guests. I don't know about the host, but but anyway, I'm completely amazed about your book. Yeah, your book was I think the first one was a bestseller, wasn't it? Now your second one's been a bestseller again, and you've got a whole new lot of information.
I do. You know, I made some promises in my first book, such as I'd give an explanation if I ever found out what happened to Rodney Letterman, and a few other things, and some information that, an entire chapter actually that I had left out of the book because my editor said, you know, you've talked about enough about your childhood experiences. Let's leave this out of the book. And I did on his advice, but, it never sat well with me. So I'm glad to have it out there and have it in print now for people to see it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to cover your early life and everything to, you know, because obviously there's quite a lot of things that, well, should have been in that book, I think, you know, considering what I've seen already of it.
I think so too. And, you know, the pride of my book is actually those 30, short stories in the back.
Mm.
You know, I don't know if I mentioned or not, last time, but I put an email address in the back of my first book and I said, look, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a therapist, but if you got a story you'd like to share, send it to me and I'll, you know, respond to you in confidence and, I want to hear your story. Well, I've got, as of this morning, 1,623 emails.
Wow.
So,
well, that's taken a time to go through, isn't it?
Every morning I make a pot of coffee and I sit down and I go through these. I'll tell you, people have sent me some of the most amazing stories, that are very credible. I took about 50 of the best stories and I contacted each individual, and we made contact by telephone. One lady I met in person, and I tried to vet them, you know, get a feel for the veracity, the credibility. You know, not that I judge anybody's credibility, but I want to judge, do they have enough grasp of the facts that it sounds logical and comes together as a story that people would find interesting.
Yeah.
And I took 30 of the very best of the best and I put them in the back of this book. And they're just short little reads.
It sounds like you've got enough material for another book as well, by the sound of it.
I have a third one in the works.
You do? Oh, that's excellent. Oh, well, we'll be back again in a few months.
Yes. Yes.
So, well, tell us a bit, I don't know if we ought to outline a little bit about the original story, just in case there are some people listening that, may not have heard the original story. I'm sure there can't be many, but,
Sure.
yeah, perhaps you just outline a little bit of the original story, Devil's Den.
Yeah, we should. Just a bit about myself real quick. I'm 65 years old. I live in Dallas, Texas. I enlisted in the United States Air Force in 1973 when I graduated from high school, and I served on active duty for the next 6 years until 1979. Left the Air Force, finished an undergraduate degree in psychology and then a law degree from University of Michigan, and made my living in the law, practiced law. That's part of the reason why I couldn't really come out and tell my story or publish this is because it would not have been well accepted. Mm. And I worked in some government jobs, so, you know, I just couldn't do that. But I can now.
Yeah.
And what happened to me, a short story, is that in 1977, while on active duty, a friend of mine, a guy I worked with, we went to a place called Devil's Den State Park. It's in the northwest corner of Arkansas, which is the state immediately below Missouri, where our base was. And it was a 6.5-hour drive south. And we went down to spend a camping trip, going to do a 2-night camping trip. Neither one of us had ever been camping in our lives. And the idea to go down here was just an odd obsession. I don't know. But we made the trip. And we decided we weren't going to stay at the campsite around other people. We wanted to find, you know, a place in the woods of our own. And, you know, we were going to be real outdoorsmen, right? We'd never done this before, but we're going to be real outdoorsmen. So we found a place of high ground, like a plateau, and we set up camp on top of this plateau. And it was aligned so it was even with the treetops all around. So it's a miracle we found the place because you had to be right up on it to see it. Set up our little camp, and you know, we did all the fun stuff you do when you camp, and it was fun and it was good. And about 9 o'clock that evening, we're sitting around the campfire, actually laying on inflatable air mattresses with the campfire between us, just having a conversation and it was a lovely night, just enjoying the night. There's 1 trillion stars out, and it was just beautiful. And then, now this sounds cliche, but I got to include it because it's relevant, I think. And other people have told me they've experienced the same thing, and that was that the forest went quiet. And I mean, it went quiet all of a sudden. Cause there was noise from like crickets and insects and tree frogs and all the things that make noise in a forest at night. All of that stopped. And that kind of unnerved me. It didn't faze my friend, but it unnerved me. And this is about 9 o'clock. And then a short while later, he has his head turned to the west and he asked me, "Hey, Terry, were those lights there before?" And I'm like, "What lights? What are you talking about?" And because I knew we were in such a remote area, we shouldn't see anything. And on the western horizon, there sat a tight little triangle of 3 very bright stars. And they were too far above the horizon to have been lights from a train or a parking lot or something. And while we're watching them, they rotated, they turned like they were on an axis. And they did about a 120-degree turn to the right. And the triangle aligned itself with the base of the triangle parallel with the horizon and started to go up into the air. And this is the point where I felt all the fear left me. All of that anxiety and nervousness, concern about the quiet and the stillness in the forest, that was all gone. And I felt, I was just in an odd place. Emotionally, I felt, just, calm, relaxed, semi-sedated, not apathetic, but maybe even close to that, disinterested maybe. And I feel like I'm an observer here rather than a participant in what's going on. And while we watched, there's no conversation between us to speak of. We just watched this thing climb. It went up it reached what I call the ceiling, about 12,000 feet, I'm guessing. And then it reoriented itself to point downward with the apex of the triangle pointed in our direction. And then it started a glide plane down toward our campsite. And as it did a somersault. Where the point of the triangle dipped under and it made a complete, somersault turnaround. And, I had the feeling that was done for us. I don't know, maybe my imagination, but I felt like that was its way of saying, no, we're not out of control. We know what we're doing. We're moving intentionally. And yes, we're coming to see you. And, no fear whatsoever. Our emotions, our reactions were all muted. It was just bizarre. And this thing came in over the forest at about 5,000 feet over the treetops. And then steadily descended and came to a stop, not quite over us, but right next to us at about 3,000 feet over our heads. And, we saw some funny lights. We saw, just some odd things. There was a beam of light that shot down from the center of the thing. And then, it was just still. And that feeling of calm that I had transitioned into sleepy. All I wanted to do was go to sleep. And my friend was of the same mindset. And he stood up and he said, "Show's over." And he grabbed his inflatable air mattress and threw it in the tent and fell on top of it. And I followed suit and did the same. And, didn't bother to take off my boots or my shirt or anything. Fell down on top of that. And, I was out. I don't think I was asleep. I think I was unconscious as soon as I hit that mattress. And that's when they took us. They took us and the best we can estimate, we were gone somewhere between 4 and 6 hours. We had no way of telling. Both of our watches, which were mechanical, wind-up watches of the day, both of them quit working. Mine quit at 2:40, Toby's quit at 2:41. Those watches never worked again. So I woke up to these bright lights flashing through the tent, and I noticed that my boots were unlaced almost all the way down. And I knew I didn't do that. And that confused me. I took off my boots and found my socks were on sideways. Well, I didn't know we had been undressed and redressed by someone else. So I laced up my boots, still no fear, I'm just confused. And my friend's on his knees looking out of this flap of the tent. And I asked him, "Toby, what is it, man? Who's out there? Is it park rangers? Who's out there?" Because I'm seeing these flashing lights. And I don't quite have my wits about me. And I'm thinking maybe those are the overhead flashing lights of a park ranger's truck there to throw us out of the park. And No, and my friend wasn't responding, so I pulled back my flap of the tent and I looked out, and this thing had descended from 3,000 feet over our heads, and it's now 30 feet over the floor of the meadow, just 30 feet above us. And these lights on the points of the triangle are flashing at odd intervals. And I could see, especially when the lights flashed, underneath what I thought to be a dozen, maybe 15 children. And I asked my friend, I said, Toby, man, what are these kids doing out here in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere? And he said, Terry, look at them again, man. Those ain't no little kids. Don't you remember? They took us and they hurt us. And I looked again, and he was right. They were not human beings. Their heads were disproportionately large to their bodies. They were the typical grays. I had never seen them before. They didn't have quite that big, huge, exaggerated eyes like you see in the motion pictures, and we were a fair ways away from them. But that's when I got scared. I was absolutely terrified that we were gonna cough or sneeze, or they'd come over and visit us. And we didn't know they were already done with us by then. They were already finished with us. So that's pretty much the story in a nutshell.
Yeah, because you kind of just all packed up and scurried off home, didn't you, basically?
We did. We watched them until they took off. And it didn't take off like a rocket ship. It just kind of lifted off and went up like a hot air balloon. If you want to know what it looked like, you can go to terrylovelace.com at my website, and I have a drawing there that I did in 1978. So it was drawn contemporaneous with the event, and that's my best rendering of what we saw. It was a giant triangular shaped ship, made no noise, yeah, that's the story in a nutshell.
Something I wondered about, in your job that you were in, which was quite, it was actually Assistant Attorney General, did you ever tell anybody at all in your, in a quiet story, in a quiet moment?
No.
Nobody?
I never trusted anyone. My wife and I have been together 47 years, so she was with me during this whole thing, and she knows the story. And my kids knew that I would have screaming nightmares once or twice a year. But we didn't tell our children.
Right.
I didn't tell anyone. To be honest with you, I knew, had I shared that story with anyone, and should they mention it, at a cocktail party or whatever, if that leaked out.
Yeah, I can see that.
In my position, I'd be unemployed. And my reputation in the legal community would be ruined. There's some professions, like academia and air traffic controllers and some branches of law enforcement where, it's a taboo topic. And if you bring it up, you'll lose your career.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, maybe it was a silly question. I just thought there might have been someone you may have trusted, like a close friend or something you might have, sort of just relayed it to, but I can see why you didn't. But,
I was tempted to.
Yeah,
but,
because it must have been. You've got that story stuck in your head, and you can't tell anyone about it. It's you've had to wait all this time to get that story out and sort of release it, basically, haven't you?
It was a relief. It was a release, and
yeah, that's what I mean. To have that bottled up inside you all those years. It's a long time.
It is. It was. Yeah. It felt good.
Yeah.
And when I speak about it today, it still feels good. Yeah.
Right, so now we move on to your next book, your latest follow-up book to it. And so you actually start off with a lifetime experience with ETs. So could you tell us a bit about that? Because obviously this is something that was left out of your original book. And you've got early childhood abductions, so obviously something was going on in your early life that you maybe didn't realise, or did you realise it?
Well, I realized a lot of it, but if you in the first book, I do talk about experiences with what I called, when you're a child, you pick names for things, and I used to have these little things that looked like monkeys that would come into my room in the middle of the night.
Yeah, I remember.
And I called them the monkey men, and they're the ones that used to take me. And sometimes I'd go with them, and sometimes I'd scream like I was being murdered, and wake up the whole household. And but I had no doubt that those were real events. Absolutely, no doubt in my mind. My sister, who is 77 years of age, told me that, and it's odd because she doesn't want to talk about it. She does not want to talk about it, but she told me, she said, yeah, I regret that I couldn't have been of more help to you whenever we woke up in the middle of the night and you weren't in the house and we couldn't find you. No lights came through the windows. So yeah, my abductions go back to probably age 4. And, I've had people write to me. I think I mentioned earlier, I've had over 1,600 people write to me. And I've had a couple hundred people tell me about experiences they had at the ages between 4 and 8. And most of them have some funny dream that they can remember in vivid detail from when they were 4 years old, 5 years old. But they carry the memory of the stupid dream with them throughout a lifetime. And it's as vivid at age 60 as it was when they were 6. And people tell me that they had visitors in their rooms too. But I saw monkeys. I saw little monkeys that were kind of comical. People told me that they've seen glowing orbs of light, little gray men. One kid from El Paso, Texas told me that he saw a raccoon walking on its hind legs that spoke to him telepathically. People have seen owls, deer, lots of owls, deer, even Disney characters. So I think that these things, E.T. has the ability to appear to us in a way that it knows we'll find the most benign, the least threatening.
Yeah. So in actual fact, I mean, obviously they could well be the shapeshifters we hear so much about.
Well, in that regard, I think they have to be. Yeah. Because I think they have that ability to shift their shape into whatever form they think that we'll accept.
Certainly sounds that way. Well, I've mentioned it on this show a few times, but did I tell you about my experience when I was a very young child? I don't think it's an ET occurrence, but I can remember I was in my cot. I'm sorry if you've all heard this before, anyone listening, but I thought I've got to tell this for Terry's benefit.
Please.
I was actually standing in my cot. I was old. I know I was young enough to still be in a cot. I may have been about, coming up to 2 years old or something like that. Just learning to, beginning to talk or whatever. But I can remember a purple mist swirling into the room and swirling around and coming right up to me and swirling around. And I can remember screaming at it. It terrified me. And my father came into the room and he couldn't, and I'm saying it in sort of baby terms. Look, right, can't you see it? Can't you see it? Sort of thing. And he couldn't see it. So I'm actually screaming at this purple mist and it sort of swirled round and around and then it swirled back out of the room again. It wasn't a dream because I could actually, it stayed with me all that time. And I actually asked my father a few years after when I was, in my teens, whatever. And he remembered it. He said, yeah, I remember you talking about that purple mist that came in. But, what that was, I really don't know. I don't know if it was a ghost or anything alien. I don't know. But it always stayed with me. It terrified me at the time. And of course, at that age, I wouldn't have known what ghosts or anything were.
Sure.
So.
Sure. Well, that's validation to have your dad remember that. That's validation. Yeah. That's proof that it wasn't a dream.
Well, yeah. I mean, I suppose at the same time, I mean, you could have a nightmare and wake up from it, and I suppose it could have been a nightmare, but I don't think it was because I can remember it so vividly and standing at the cot, But who knows? Maybe it was a nightmare, but But then again, when you have a nightmare like that, why would I have a terrifying nightmare that I don't know anything about? I don't know anything about ghosts at that age, and
a purple mist would not have been a part of your world.
No, that's right. So what would that have been? I don't know. I've asked several people, would they think that, there's any significance in the purple and the mist and everything? I mean, I've seen mists later on, when I've been walking around Rendlesham Woods and things like that, or you take photos of things, they're not there, but when you take a photo, you've got a mist in the picture, which is not there, before.
Yes.
But,
yes.
Anyway, I digressed a little bit. I'm sorry, Terry. I just thought you might be interested in that because you were talking about children.
No, I'm fascinated by that. As a matter of fact, I would like to make one quick comment, and that is that, in all these letters that I got from people, they weren't limited to UFO and alien type encounters. I got letters from people who had near-death experiences, who saw ghosts, who had Bigfoot, who had all kinds of experiences. And, when I read all these letters from people, it seems to me like there's a thread. There's some kind of commonality that runs through all of them.
I think there's a connection between it all. I think all paranormal occurrences are linked in some way.
I agree. I feel certain of that. Yeah.
Very interesting. Right. Okay. Well, on from that. There was a hybrid entity you called Sue.
When I was a child, there was a Asian woman. She was from Japan. She had married a U.S. soldier in post-war Japan and had moved to the States with him. And he had passed away, but she lived in a flat behind us. And all of us kids knew her as Sue, and very kind lady. And, he used to bake stuff and hand it out to the kids in the neighborhood. And my mother knew her well. She visited our home. So when they took me, there was what I took to be a petite Asian woman. And in retrospect, she wasn't Asian at all. She was some type of hybrid. And I called her Sue at the time, because I knew one Asian, I'm a child. I'm 4 and 5 years old. I know one Asian woman in my life, and it was Sue. So I thought, well, this is another Sue. And the Sue that was the hybrid was always there. When they would take me as a child, I'd be in a round room with white walls and a gray padded floor, and there would be a group of kids there, and it was always the same group of kids. But it wasn't kids from the neighborhood. It wasn't kids that I knew as neighbors, or I wasn't in school then, but I don't know who they were, but they were always the same kids. And I wonder to this day if I ran into one of them, would I know? But when she would come, these little monkey guys would somehow transport me into this setting, and it felt like a little school, with all of us kids, and this woman that I called Sue, the hybrid, was very kind to all of us, and very maternal. And that's when I saw her in 2017, and she hadn't aged a day. I recognized her, and I said in the first book, I felt a fondness for her, not in a romantic way, but in a maternal way. And it goes back to when I was 4 and 5 and having these visits. And it was establishing a relationship. I think a lot of people that have had these relationships as children, and they may not even be aware of it, have probably had contact throughout a lifetime. I know I had contact in 1987 when I had some missing time on a motorcycle ride. And then I had contact in October of 2017 when I was writing the book, the first book, Incident at Devil's Den. And that story, I woke up in my living room, and I know that this sounds hard to believe, but this is true. And I have never sleepwalked in my life. I don't know how I got into the living room. Last I knew, I was asleep in bed, and I woke up and I had that calm, sedated feeling, just like what I felt down at Devil's Den State Park. And seated directly across from me was a woman dressed in black, with a red scarf around her neck, and she had on a black wig that sat on her head kind of askew, sideways, because it was a hairpiece that was made for a human head, and her head was not human. It had a bulbous shape to it in the back, her cranium was larger than ours. She had a pencil-thin neck, which is why she wore that scarf around her neck. And she spoke with me telepathically. And I knew her. And I remembered her. And we had a conversation. And, she told me some things. And she told me that the government would not be happy with my writing this book. And that there may be some fallout from it. Mm. She shared mental imagery with me. And there's a couple vignettes that I remember. I remember sitting down in an interrogation room whenever the Air Force Office of Special Investigation, whenever their special agents were interrogating me or interviewing, depending on your perception. And I could see myself drawing this. And then, and these little vignettes of memory, lasted just a few seconds. But, she showed me that when I had that 2 hours of missing time from my motorcycle ride, that's when, she had landed as a passenger in this saucer-like thing that sat down in this farm field in the middle of nowhere, in front of me. And I went with her, and I got in this saucer-like craft thing, and we went to a larger ship, that I described. And, that's when we made the trip around the back of the moon. I know that sounds insane, but the purpose of that trip, I think, was to show me that they were there. And I saw a city on the far side of the moon.
Really?
That was as big as LAX, as big as Los Angeles. And it was just this, well, it was dark. It was pitch black. But the place was lit up. And it just looked odd at first glance, at first appearance. Something looked out of place. And I realized what it was, there were no streets. When you fly into some place at night, you see streets and parking lots lit up. I didn't see it. There were no streets and no parking lots. It was just an odd collection of buildings. And that struck me as bizarre. And there was a mushroom-shaped, building or structure that, I asked, how high is that? Because it was much higher than everything. And Sue told me that it was 1.5 kilometers in height, which I guess is about a mile in feet. And the place was lit up crazy. She told me that there were people from our governments collectively, not just the United States, that lived there on the moon in this community on the far side, on the dark side of the moon. And the reason that they're there is to collect the rocks, her words, to collect the rocks. And I asked her, why do they need the rocks? And she says they process them for the gas, He3. And I had to look up He3. And helium-3 is a gas that's abundant on the moon. It's locked up inside of moon rocks. And it can be processed on the moon, and it can be used for a cold fusion reactor here on Earth, and you can have an active reactor to supply energy like crazy, and there is no radioactivity in the waste. So that's a very precious commodity. And she says that there are many kinds of ET type entities that come to the moon for that same purpose, to mine the rocks. And, it's been going on for years.
I find that quite intriguing, actually, because that means that astronauts who went to the moon and went round the far side of the moon must have seen the same as what you saw.
They had to.
That's what I'm saying. They had to, didn't they? And they kept that quiet. Or we've heard rumours before that astronauts have seen UFOs, etc. So, do you think they knew more about what they were going to the moon for? Do you want?
I sure do. You know, and I can point to, there's a very famous interview with Buzz Aldrin and the crew that would have known. They definitely would have known. And they were, when they returned to Earth, they were in quarantine for a while. And when they went out of quarantine, they did a press conference. And they were at a table, like a stage, and it was, recorded television. Just, if you can find the footage, look at these guys. Just look at them. Look at their facial expression.
It's just the one where Neil Armstrong said something about the truth or something being hidden or something. I can't remember what his exact words were. But Neil Armstrong looked quite peeved, didn't he? That as if he'd been told he couldn't say anything.
And that's probably right. And there's Dr. Edgar Mitchell, who was a famous astronaut and a very respected person. Dr. Edgar Mitchell, while he claims he never saw a UFO, he knew that they were there and could attest to that he had knowledge of that. And he formed an institute called the Institute for Noetic Sciences, and they published a book called Science of Consciousness and Contact with Non-Human Intelligence. And the project is kind of run by a gentleman named Ray Hernandez. And he has a book out. It's about 800 pages. It's a great big book, and it focuses on ET contact with non-human entities and the effects on human consciousness. And what is human consciousness? Which I guess is still a mystery. I studied psychology for my undergraduate degree, and back then they told me that I learned that consciousness was a state of awareness. That was it. That was the definition. And I think there's a lot more to it. I think consciousness is more important. If we're looking for something that thread of commonality that runs through all of it, through ghosts, through Bigfoot, through UFOs, through all of it, I think that thread's going to turn out to be consciousness in some way, shape, or form.
When you were talking about that conference with Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong, etc., there's other people that will turn that around and say what they were actually trying to say was that they didn't go to the moon. They've tried to turn it around the other way.
And that could be, I got more information from their not verbally, but from their physical cues, the way they sat, the way they looked. They looked like men that were stunned. And if you can find that footage, watch them. Watch their facial expression, watch their body posture. Yeah.
I have seen it several times, yeah. I'd like to dig it out, and perhaps I'll put it on the Paranormal Dimensions page so anyone that hasn't seen it can see it. But it is quite intriguing, I've got to say. I mean, if you saw what you say you saw on the moon, then they must have seen it too. And obviously astronauts that have followed on from them too, because they weren't the only ones.
Well, I've had a lot of people write to me and tell me that they've had dreams of that, or they've been shown that, or that some claim they've been there. So, I don't know. But Betty stressed to me that there are, as far as the United States is concerned, there are 2 space programs. She said that there is the space program, and back then 2017, she used the word, the space shuttle program. Yeah. And she said that's the public face of your space program. But there's another that's hidden, that's not seen. And, they do the shuttle launches and the shuttle missions to launch satellites and give the public a feeling like we're doing something with space. But she made the point, mankind hasn't, if you listen to that story, mankind's not really left Earth's atmosphere since 1969 or 1971, I think was the last mission. Yeah, you're right. So, and why would that be? That doesn't make any sense. Why we didn't go back. Yeah, we're talking about the secret space program, aren't we? And that could be where all these billions of dollars go missing every year out of the Pentagon. Yes, because they seem to lose billions every year, don't they? Where does that all go? Yeah. I think that's where it's big part of it goes. That's where I think it goes. Yeah. Well, these, it's curious. Black budgets. and the United States instituted a fifth branch of its armed forces called the Space Force. And I don't know why we need a Space Force. I've never heard of such a thing. I don't know, you have a force to counter a threat. And what threat is there in space that we need a Space Force to protect us from?
Yeah. Well, maybe one day we might, but it's very intriguing. How about, there's a story in there about the mysterious death of Tobias.
Yes.
It's a hybrid, no, it's not a hybrid entity, it's Tobias. You tell us a bit about that.
Yes. Toby was my friend. He was the friend that went with me on the camping trip.
Oh, right.
And Toby and I had worked together for 3 years, and we were the best of friends. And when we got back from our camping trip, we were both hospitalized. They had, somehow from being on this ship, we got burned. I had like the worst sunburn I'd ever experienced in my life, but my skin never peeled and I never blistered. So it was strange. And I had burns to my eyes that were similar to what like an arc welder would get if they didn't wear that hood over their face. So my eyes were injured too. And we were hospitalized, but we were separated. And there's a famous researcher named Robert Hastings who wrote a book 10 or 15 years ago called UFOs and Nukes, where he researched active duty people at nuclear bases all over the world. And he read my book and he contacted me and said, oh yeah, he said, that's normal routine. That's standard procedure. They separate you two because they ordered us to have no contact with one another. And I saw him one last time and I stopped by his house and, in violation of an order not to see him. And, they cut orders for him to go to Japan. They cut those at light speed. He was gone in a matter of weeks. And I went up and shook his hand and then wanted to wish him well. And I thought it would give me some kind of closure over this thing, but it really didn't. It really didn't work out the way I expected it to work out. It just felt awkward. And here this guy was my, just weeks before was my best friend.
Yeah. Actually, I've got to say, I didn't actually connect Tobias because in what you call, it was called Toby, wasn't he, as your friend? I don't remember him being mentioned as Tobias at all. Yes. That's why I didn't connect the two.
Apologize. I apologize. I used the two interchangeably.
Yeah.
Like someone, would you say Dave or David?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just didn't connect the two, but I can see that now. Well, how did he actually pass over?
Well, here's the rest of the story. When I saw him that last time, again, it was an awkward encounter. It wasn't what I expected it to be. And I shook his hand and I said, I just want to wish you well. And he looked up at me and he said, it happened, didn't it, Terry? And I know what he meant. And I said, yes, my brother, it really happened. You're not losing your mind. And then he said, but why us? And I didn't know, but I just felt panicked, and I left, turned around, left the house, and ran to my car, and that was the last I saw of him. Now, that was in 1977. He was gone to Japan in a matter of weeks. I finished my enlistment in 1979, and then went to school, and early 80s, 83 maybe. I thought, I'd like to get a hold of Toby. And, cause we never really had an opportunity to get together and debrief. When two people go through an experience like we went through, it's important, I think, that you sit down and have an opportunity to validate each other's experience and say, oh my God, did you see what I saw? But we never had that opportunity. And I wanted that. And I felt like I was ready for that. So, I had a phone number tucked away that was his father's, address in Flint, Michigan. So I called him and, he answered the phone and he knew who I was. And he said, well, Toby doesn't actually stay here, but he comes here now and then. and I got the impression Toby might be homeless. And he said, when he stops, I said, well, when you see Toby next time, please give him my number and tell him, to give me a call. And he promised that he would. And I didn't hear from him, and I didn't think much about it until the holidays rolled around. And I thought, it's been 8 months now. I've not heard from Toby. I'm going to call the old man back. And I call him back, and the number's disconnected. So I found out his wife and my wife were both close friends. And she left Toby when they were in Japan. She left before he ended his enlistment. His enlistment was ended. And she moved back stateside with the 2 children. And they ended up divorcing. And she had custody of the 2 children. And she was remarried by this point. And she'd married a man who was a long haul, over the road, he drove a truck across country, delivering freight. And, she said that she and her husband had a load to take to, Detroit, Michigan, which wasn't far from us. And she said, I'm going to ride along with him because I've never been on one of his runs before. So the kids are going to stay with their grandparents, and I'm going to ride with him. We'd like to know if he'd like some company. And my wife said, absolutely. Please stop by and visit us. We'll have dinner. And they did. So we had a nice dinner together, and it was a little bit awkward talking about, she had her new husband there, and all I wanted to talk about was her ex, So I pushed as hard as I could, and what she told me was that Toby had a problem with alcohol, and that this camping trip seemed like it just destroyed his life. She said, he didn't go to the bars, and he didn't drink during the daytime or in the morning, but she said he was afraid of the night, and that kind of resonates with me. I mean, I still sleep with a light on. I can understand that. I had my struggles with it too. But she said that, an hour, 2 hours before bedtime, he would start pounding hard liquor and just drink until he was unconscious. And that was how he slept. So, the effects that'll have on your life, your life will fall apart eventually. And that's what happened.
Well, obviously, he was holding it all inside as well, all that time.
He was. And I don't know why I was able to process it, but he wasn't. And the other odd event that happened was that, I was involved, some years later, I was involved in a case where the FBI was backed, the Federal Bureau of Investigation here. And I'd always known those guys to be, the men and women to be stand-up people, rock solid people. And, we were working on this case, and, we would meet on Friday nights after work sometimes and have a drink at the bar and, talk about the week. And, one night I asked him, I said, I'm trying to find this buddy of mine that I was in the Air Force with, and I can't find him. I said, can you find him? And he said, sure, I can find anybody, as long as they're not a fugitive. And then he laughs, because that's his job, is to find fugitives. So the dry FBI humor. And, he said, yeah, sure. He said, do this. He said, write down everything you can remember about the guy, a photograph if you have one, everything you know, what he liked, what he disliked, where he lived, his parents' names, sisters, brothers, cousins, anything you can think of, what kind of cards did he like, anything that would be relevant. And it's amazing how much information you can know about somebody if you work with them on a night shift for 3 years. So I did. I had a lot of information to give him. And I took it over to him, and he said he would do his best. He said, now look, I can't open an investigation, obviously. There's no crime committed here. But he said, as a favor to you, I can try to find your friend. And I said, that's great. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And a few weeks later, I got a call from him, and he said, hey, meet me at the bar. I got some information about your friend. And I'm like, oh, great. So we met, and he was uncharacteristically late. And I could tell when he walked in that something that wasn't good news, because he walked in just with that look. And he sat down and he said, Terry, I have bad news for you. Your friend is dead. And I said, he's dead. What do you mean he's dead? How could he be dead? He's a young man. And he says, yeah, I know. But he says, Terry, you've been around the block once or twice. You know how life is. He says, it was a crossover automobile accident. He was killed. And he says, I suggest that you come to grips with it, accept it, and move on with your life. And I thought, my God. And I did that. And what frustrates me is, and that wasn't true. It wasn't true at all.
Hmm.
And I could have easily verified that information. I could have picked up the phone and called the Michigan State Police and have verified that he passed away in an automobile accident. I could have done that. And I didn't do that because I trusted the guy. But I think that I believe that on the federal level, there's some file somewhere that says these two guys aren't supposed to get together. That's what I think.
Hmm. So they obviously knew. They obviously knew the story then. But,
I think they did. Yeah, I do. Now, in 2017, when I was writing the books, I decided I wanted to find out where he was buried and visit his gravesite.
As you would do, yeah.
So I found it, but his date of death was September 4th, 2007.
Mm.
So he was alive all those years. All those years we could have connected.
Hmm. I wonder why they would do that. I really can't see why, because someone you trusted, and why would lie to you like that?
Because I think, I really believe that somewhere within that federal system, he probably checked my file to make sure I wasn't a fugitive.
Yeah.
I'm sure he checked Toby's file. I think they probably got files on all of us,
I suppose he was told that he's got to tell you something like that to make you go, forget about it and go, just go away, basically. Wow.
Well, that goes back to what Robert Hastings told me, the guy that wrote the book UFOs and Nukes. And he said that they don't want you guys together. He says they want, and he said the reason for that is obvious, that, two people can validate each other's story, and two stories are much more believable than one.
Yeah.
So
that's a shame. I did try to get Robert Hastings on this show, actually. He did say yes originally. Oh, what was that? What's the noise come up? He did say yes originally, but he had quite a bad, wasn't very well last year. He had some heart trouble. And I don't think he felt up to it.
I spoke with him last week, and he's not in the best of health.
No, I know. I don't think he's doing much of anything, is he really? Which is a great shame, because
it is.
Yeah, very intelligent man. Anyway, let's move on. Your cousin Gerald, who endured his own ET visitations.
Yes, he did. And he wasn't the only person that saw clowns. I had other people tell me they saw clowns.
Right.
And he was my age, and he lived in Middle Arkansas, not near Devil's Den, but in Arkansas. And we lived in St. Louis, Missouri. And once a year they would visit us for a week. And they called it a vacation, and that's what poor people did back in the day, is they'd visit a relative, and then that relative would feed and water them for a week. And then, the next holiday come around, it would be, we would drive down there and spend a week with them, and then they would reciprocate. And, so I saw him once a year, every year. And, I had heard that he was having problems, but his family, unlike my family, his family was very, very religious, and they interpreted this as a demonic presence, and they didn't interpret it. Well, my family interpreted it as being, influence from watching Space Ghost on television. They interpreted it as a sign of demon possession. And, they had him blessed in the church several times. And in that regard, they kind of pushed the blame and the fault into his lap, cause he told me, he said, I'm told that, when you think bad thoughts, that opens the door and lets the demons in. And I told him, I said, Gerald, that's not right. You're not the one at fault here. I said, I don't know what you're seeing in the night, but I know what I'm seeing is real. And I know where they take me is someplace real. And he admitted that they took him. Although his memory, his recollections of going weren't as vivid as mine, he knew he was being taken from his bed. Amazingly, he had twin brothers, younger than he was, who slept in the same bedroom. Never saw, never heard a thing.
So, when you mentioned St. Louis, I had a vision. Did you ever go up? I don't know if the arch was up when you were living there, was it?
You know, I was there while they built that.
Oh, were you?
Yes, and didn't live very far from it. So yeah. It was interesting. It's a very interesting monument.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I've been up it twice. It's quite an amazing train thing that goes up it. It's sort of low, because it's like an angled train, isn't it? It clicks up and up because it's going up into like a rounded. It's very difficult to describe it actually.
Yeah, it is a good description, like a little capsule.
Yeah, it sort of clicks up. It's like climbing stairs, isn't it? In a train.
Yes, it is. It is. And the view is spectacular.
Oh, it's fantastic. Yeah. But anyway, I digress again. I just wondered if you were there when it was up. But,
I was there the day they put the final piece in the what do they call that? The capstone, I guess. The piece that joins the two arches together.
Yeah. Because that's supposed to be the gateway to the west, isn't it?
It is. It is. There's a very fun museum underneath.
It is, yes. And did it get flooded a few years back when yes, a lot of floods in Missouri?
Yeah, it did. They got flooded in 1993. It was what they called a 100-year flood. And, yeah, the entire city was flooded. Yeah. Of course, by then I was in Michigan. It didn't affect me, but, yeah, there was a lot of damage.
Yeah, I've been in that museum a couple of times. I was just wondering how much damage was caused down there, because they had some amazing artifacts down there. But, sad.
Yes.
You want to tell us some more stories out of your book?
Yeah, I'd love to tell some stories out of the book. I'd like to share some of the stories that people sent to me, because I think that they're important, and I think that they're really very, very interesting. The first story that's in my book, I think is important. It's a how old is she? 76? I believe she's 76 years of age. She may be 75 or 78. But going from memory, she's 76 years of age. She lives in Henderson, Nevada. And she sent me an email and told me, she said that she's never shared this story with anyone, but that she'd like to share it with me and the world. And she wanted to use the name Olivia. She didn't want to use her real name, and I respect that. I understand that. And she told me that in March of 1968, she and her husband were going to make a trip from Las Vegas, Nevada to Reno, a couple hours drive across desert. And her husband was a nephrologist, a kidney doctor that worked in a hospital. And like most physicians, he works 60, 70 hours a week. But every month he got one 4-day weekend. And on this 4-day weekend every month, they would usually hop in a car and make the drive from Las Vegas to Reno in a few hours, and give them time to just talk and chat and catch up on things. And they would always stop at this little town called Tonopah, which was right at about the halfway mark between Las Vegas and Reno, and get gas and have a meal there. And she said that they did this in March of 1968. It was a routine deal, and nothing unusual. And they got back in their car and they headed toward Reno, and they're about 10 miles outside of the town of Tonopah, and they saw this odd glow on the horizon, and they knew there was nothing there but desert. And she wondered, asked her husband, what are those lights? And he thought, well, maybe it's an accident or something. So they got close, and they saw that it was a store. It was and this was about 10 o'clock at night. It's a store that sat back from the road just a bit, and it had in bright big letters on top of it, Christmas. And she said, I had never in my life seen a store devoted to the holiday. She said that first time ever. And she asked her husband, she said, pull over, would you? I want to look at this place. And I said, can you describe it? And she said, yes. She told me, we spoke on the phone. She was a little uncomfortable with email. She felt more comfortable on the phone, so we talked by phone. And she told me that this place had what looked like 1 million twinkling Christmas lights, like you put in a Christmas tree, wrapped all around it. And it was a square structure, maybe 50 by 50 feet, a single story. What's odd is she remembers it as being a brick structure. Her husband remembers it as being made out of like rustic barn wood. But in every other regard, their stories lined up perfectly. And he pulled over to the shoulder of the road and was directly in front of this building. And she said it had a row of windows, and there was a lot of bright lights inside, and they could see movement inside, and they assumed maybe it was people working on the building. Maybe it was still under construction. And then she said, well, why don't you pull in? And he says, well, where do I do that at? And she said, I remember her exact words were I'd never seen a building before built without an egress. And there wasn't even a parking lot, and there were no cars there. It was just this building with the crazy lights inside and then the Christmas lights all around it. And she said that her husband had parked a car in front of this place, and while they were there, she said they kind of used the word mesmerized. She said we were just kind of zoned out looking at this thing. And I said, well, how long could you have been? And she said, I don't know. We were kind of just silent for a minute or two, but it just I don't know. And I said, well, Olivia, do you think you could have missing time? You think you could have been there for, an hour, but you only remember 3 minutes of it? And she kind of laughs and she said, how would you know if you had missing time? And then she came back and said, you know what? I can't rule that out because we were late getting into Reno, but I can't tell you how late. So they finished their trip to Reno. They went up and they felt kind of out of sorts for about 24 hours. And they slept late. They got up the next morning when their friends called them by phone, woke them up. And they went about and had a normal weekend and just had a good time. And on the trip back, they didn't really talk about it, but she said her husband brought it up actually, and he said, on our way back, let's stop by that Christmas store. He said, it was just a strange thing. I want to see it in the daytime. And she's like, yeah, me too. Let's do that. So they committed that they'd do that. And they drove back, and there was no Christmas store. It wasn't there. And they were certain where they'd seen it. And they were so certain of what they saw that they made 3 passes. They did it, turned around and went back on the other side of the highway, and then turned around and went back again, and then did it a 3rd time. And it's just not there.
Yeah. I've got to say, it's not as if there's highways everywhere, is there? You've only got sort of like 1 or 2 highways that go through these sort of areas.
Back then, this was the only one.
Yeah,
that's
what I mean.
Yeah. And I asked her, I said, could you tell, was there a back entrance maybe? Was there a road that went around to the back of the thing? And she said, no, not that we could see. It was all sand and sagebrush. So I asked her the question. I said, Olivia, do you think you saw a flying saucer or a UFO? And she says, yeah, I do. I think we did.
Yeah, I suppose it could have materialised in something that was looked friendly to them, I guess.
Yeah, just like they appear to children in the way they think it's benign. They can disguise their craft, I guess, to make them look like anything.
Yeah, to attract them.
Yeah.
That's a weird.
And she told me that she had horrible nightmares about this thing, though. She and her husband did both. And her husband didn't want to talk about it. He didn't talk about his nightmares, but she knew he had them. Her nightmares, and she said, this doesn't make sense that this should even scare me, because it wasn't scary.
No, 'cause it's Christmas. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. But the nightmare she would have would be, she and her husband looking at this craft, looking at this Christmas store, And something about seeing the movement in the lights and the shadows through the windows, she said, would just absolutely terrify her, and she'd wake up and, have to turn the lights on and just kind of shake it off because it frightened her so bad.
Interesting story, that one.
Yeah,
so,
I thought so.
So they were obviously convinced by it anyway. And like you say, why would it scare them?
Yeah, doesn't make sense.
Yeah. I'll tell you what intrigued me a little bit further back on this bit of paper I've got in front of me here, which I've lost. There was something about a gun. He said, your friend Ernest, who at 8 years of age borrowed his dad's handgun in an ill-conceived plan to shoot dead the ETs that terrified him in his room at night.
Yes, that
sounds pretty scary.
Well, it was, and 8-year-old boys shouldn't be playing with handguns.
Exactly, that's what I mean.
It was actually my idea, and it was actually my father's handgun. And Ernie helped me out with the plan. He helped me get the handgun and, cause I knew where my dad kept his handgun. He kept it in back of the head of his bed. There was a space and he kept it loaded back there with a flashlight. And,
so it wasn't locked away then?
No, it was not. It was not. Yeah. And, I'm sure he thought that, kid will never look here. If you think your children don't look through your stuff, think again.
Just look everywhere, I know.
If you've got a handgun, you gotta lock it up. I lock mine up.
I actually picked the lock of my parents' bedroom once because where we used to live, there was in an old house. They used to have a lock at the top of the stairs. It's have the bedroom was locked, and I actually picked it with a hair clip once. when I was about 8 or 9, but the thing was I couldn't lock it back up again. And of course, when my mother saw it, she said, I'm sure I locked this room. I just wanted to go and have a nose round as kids do,
Yeah.
It just amazed me that I actually managed to pick it with a hair clip.
You know what? Yeah, that might have been a handy thing to have throughout life, that ability.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'd seen it in films. I thought I'd try it, and it worked.
Wow. Was that the skeleton key kind of thing they call it? Like an old school lock?
It was like a normal key lock, but I imagine I should probably just managed to, because I imagine there was nothing complicated inside those locks, but it was just one of those things. I found one of my mum's hair clips and picked the lock. Thing is, I found I couldn't lock it back up again, but I just played innocent. I knew nothing about it.
My friend Ernest suggested that we do target practice. That he said, what if you shoot and you miss? Because my plan was to shoot these 4 monkeys dead. That was my plan. And I say so in my first book that I wrote. There's a poem in there that I wrote, and in the very last stanza, and I said something to the effect of. When 4 little monkeys come around my bed, I'll use my revolver and shoot them all dead. A poem I wrote as a kid. So I took this, Ernie and I took this handgun. Put it in my pocket. It was loaded. And, he made these targets. He drew monsters on these big cardboard targets, And we rode our bikes down to the city park a block away. And we did this at, 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning. Nobody was out. And put the targets up against a big sycamore tree, and we're standing back about 30 feet, and I got the pistol in my hand, and Ernie says, "Well, you got to take the safety off." And of course, at this age, I didn't know that revolvers don't have safeties, especially not double action revolvers. It's you pull the trigger and the hammer goes back and the hammer drops forward and bang, that's it. So we get in this tug of war with this thing because he wants to see it and I don't want to give it to him. And somebody's hand was on the trigger and it was probably mine. And then I never knew how loud a real gunshot would be because I'd only heard gunshots on TV, and I thought that they would be equally as loud. Well, this thing discharged, and it was like a cannon going off. And we immediately check ourselves. And, you know, my grandmother had a saying, God looks after fools, drunkards, and little children. And, you know, she was right about that, because we were fortunate. Neither one of us were shot. I don't know where that bullet went. It went somewhere. And we got out of there, and I realized that there's no way that I could keep this in my room hidden and shoot these things dead. That would just not work.
Would have disturbed everyone, I would have thought. And so you were one of the lucky ones. Unfortunately, a lot of children do get shot by accident, don't they?
Sure do.
Unfortunately. Yeah.
Yes.
So glad you came through that one anyway.
Yes. And my poor cousin Gerald, you know, that's a sad tale for him too, is that, you know, we felt a bond because we had this thing in common, you know, and I felt bad for him because I didn't have, you know, support from my family, but he had just the opposite. He had, you know, criticism, and so I felt sorry for the kid. And you know, when he was 19 years old, he took his life. Oh. I think it was directly related to, you know, the unresolved tension and anxiety and family upset from this event. So, but we'll never know.
Yeah, it could well be if it's something that you're living with.
Yeah. I don't know how we're doing on time, but I'd like to tell you another story.
Yeah, sure. Do another one. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I got a really interesting letter from this guy in South Africa, and he read my book, and he told me his story, and I thought it was just really a fascinating story. He had a auto repair shop outside the city limits of Johannesburg, kind of in a rural area, a farm area. And it was actually his father's business to begin with, and he kind of inherited it. But he took care of this little village where he lived. He took care of the people's automobiles and their farm equipment. And he said that he got a call one day while he was in his shop. He got a call from a man named Duncan, an older gentleman that he knew well, who said that he was broken down at the end of his property, that he had lost a belt, that a belt had broken on his tractor. And he said, I knew, he said, quote, I was familiar with the machine, I knew what he needed, and he hopped in his Land Rover and he went out to visit Duncan to fix his tractor. And he drove to the far edge of the property, and Duncan had broken down near a hedgerow with a few small trees that separated his property from the adjoining property. And he said he got there, and Duncan was, quote, just a mess. He was just scared to death. And you know, he asked him, what's wrong? What you know, it's just a belt. What's the big deal? And he says, no. He says, come with me. And for some reason, they were both carrying sidearms. And I don't know what the situation was in South Africa at the time, but they both were carrying sidearms. And he said Duncan had his gun out, and so he drew his out because he expected there to be people on the other side, some kind of threat. And he said that they cut through this hedgerow, and on the opposite side of the hedgerow was a farmer's field that was just grass, and no houses present. And there were 4 of these bullet-shaped objects, about the size of a full-size van or a small truck. And they were shaped just like a bullet, pointed at the top. They were shiny aluminum, and they were in a diamond-shaped formation, 4 of them. And they were all spinning. They were all turning. He said they were turning really, really fast, just spinning around. And he asked Duncan, he says, well, what are these things? Where'd they come from? And Duncan says, well, I saw them. He said, they flew in this formation. They flew right over me when I was messing with the tractor. And I climbed through the hedgerow and saw that they sat down over here, and they've been here ever since. And Duncan was scared to death. And Duncan says, well, they got to be from outer space. And Byron says, no. He says, these aren't from outer space. These are from the United States or the Chinese or the Soviet Union or someplace, but there's no such thing as outer space. So he says, watch, I'm going to prove it to you. So he says, I'm going to walk up and say hi to him. And, he made his friend, he said, he made his friend put the gun away. He was afraid he was going to get shot by accident. And his friend puts the gun away, and, he walks up to the machine that's closest to him, and, he yelled out, I didn't talk to him by phone. We were all email correspondence, and some of his words were kind of in half English, half Dutch or Afrikaan. I don't know. And he hailed the thing by yelling out Hayata, H-E-I-T-A, which I guess is a greeting in Afrikaan. And, so he yells out Hayata, or however it's pronounced. And, he said as soon as he did, the thing slowed and came to a stop. And it descended from about 4 feet down to about 2 feet above the ground. And an arched doorway opened up at the side of the thing. And there was a man standing there, he said, in a tinfoil suit with gloves and boots, and nothing on his head. And he described in his words, he said he appeared to be of the Mongoloid race, with tiny ears and not much of a nose. But his eyes looked very normal, and he had a mouth, and, but no hair in his head, like he shaved his head. And, he said he spoke. He didn't use the word telepathic. He used another word, thought transference. He said he spoke to me through thought transference. And he said, that this guy in this, whatever it was, said, we're very sorry for the trespass. We have a mechanical problem. We'll have it fixed shortly and be on our way. And, Byron asked him, he said, well, who are you? What are you here for? And the answer was, we're here to neither harm nor help. We're just here to observe, and we'll be on our way soon. I love this. I think this is the greatest line in the world. He told me, he says, well, I asked the man, he said, I'm pretty good with machinery. Can I give you a hand repairing your machine? And the guy said, you'd like to see the machine, wouldn't you? And he said, yes, I would. And he's asked, would you like to come in? And he said, yes, I would. And then the entity held up his hand and said, but maybe you shouldn't. Your friend is not doing well. He's very afraid. He says, your friend's not in good health. You should go back and assure him that he's okay. No one's going to be hurt, and we'll be on our way shortly. So he said he held up his hand, a universal goodbye, and the guy held up his hand. The door shut, and the thing started revolving again. And while they watched, sometime later, these four things lifted off in unison and took off in formation. And according to this guy, they went from 0 to 500 miles an hour in a blink of an eye, and were gone. And what was interesting is I've heard so many people that, like Toby and I, we kind of, they have an experience like this and they kind of drift apart. They don't, they don't have that debriefing. But according to Byron, he said, yeah, we were like old war mates. He said, we'd get together when no one was around to hear us and have a whiskey. And, he said we'd talk about it over and over and over again, how unbelievable it was. And,
it's a shame.
So I thought
it's a shame they don't have cameras with them, isn't it, sometimes, with some of these things.
It is. And I wonder though, how many, everybody has a phone in their pocket now. And, when I saw this thing back in 1977, I didn't have a camera with me. Even though I was an amateur photographer, I left my camera at home. I was just, and I'm not that inept. I don't understand that. But my friend had his camera. He had a camera in his bag a foot away from him. And the thought of taking it out and taking a picture of this thing never crossed our minds. It never occurred to us.
I think I remember you saying that last time when you were on the show. Yeah.
Well, I think that really speaks to the level of influence that they have over us.
Yeah, just to make you not think of it.
Yeah, I think they can do that. I do.
Your book has gone to #1, apparently.
It did. It hit #1. I'm not sure where it's at today, but it's usually in the top 10 or might hit 15. It changes by the hour depending on sales.
Congratulations on that. Anyway, it's very good news for you, and I'm glad it's done well for you. Well, I haven't actually got it yet. I'm going to get it, but you've got your terrylovelace.com website. Have you got any other sort of if anyone wanted to get in touch with you, for instance, have you got an email address they could write to?
Certainly do. You can contact me at terrylovelace@yahoo.com. And if you've got a story to share, I'd love to hear it. And my books are at amazon.uk. Incident at Devil's Den. It's available in a $5 Kindle book or a paperback with photographs. And then Incident at Devil's Den, the first book, is available both in print, in Kindle, and I did an audiobook. So I'm going to do an audiobook for this book as well. I just haven't had a chance yet.
Right.
So,
yeah, because I suppose that takes a few hours to do, doesn't it?
It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
I can't believe that I wrote this material, and it should be easy for me to read, and I stumble. I really do. And I've had other people who've done audiobooks tell me the same thing, that they ran into the same problem.
Yeah, that's the strange thing. It's not easy reading something out, is it? You seem to stumble all over the place.
Yeah, it's much different. I mean, I can read silently to myself with not any problem. Somewhere in transcribing it from written print through visual to verbal, it's easy to get it messed up.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Anyway, so it's been fantastic having you back on the show. Now, if you're going to do a third book, hopefully you'll come back on again and tell us more about that.
You'll sure know about it.
I'm sure I will.
I'll let you know. And I really, really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I always have fun when we sit down and chat, and it's like talking to a friend in my living room. It's just
thank you.
A very pleasant show.
That's the way I try to make it. It's I'm not serious all the time. Although we do cover serious subjects, but I try to put a little bit of a light spin on it. But
yeah.
I mean, when do you think your new book will come out?
May or June.
As early as that?
That's kind of the target date.
Okay.
Yes, I'm hoping. So.
Okay, well, perhaps towards the end of the year, around about November or something. While it's had a chance to come out and get reactions of people, perhaps you could tell us about it then, or maybe even a bit sooner.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, if I'm planning on April or May, that'll be October and November. So
I think there's a few books that I've been expecting round about this year coming, early this year, and they're still not arrived yet. So,
yes.
So you could well, especially with all this COVID, I think that's caused a lot of delays, hasn't it?
Oh yes, it has. But I'm hoping we see a return to normal. Whatever normal is going to be, I want to get there.
Yeah, sure. Well, you've got some trips lined up anyway, haven't you? I know that.
I have. I'm going to Arizona next week, on Thursday, going to Sedona, Arizona, which is an interesting place.
Yeah, Sedona's beautiful, yeah.
You've done it. Yeah, it is, especially in March. It's very
I've
nice.
actually travelled pretty extensively throughout the old South and Southwest.
Sounds like. Well, next time you're in Texas, you've got to let me know.
Yeah, I've done Texas as well. Yeah, maybe I will. You never know. Whether I'll ever get back to the States again, I don't know. But hopefully I will one day.
I hope to make it over there one day soon.
Yeah, well, you'll always be welcome.
Yes.
But I hope you do make it over, because it'll, it depends if we're all allowed to travel again one day, isn't it?
Yeah, we're on the same page. Yeah.
Anyway, Terry, I'll let you go. Now, thank you very much for coming on. It's been great fun and very interesting, as always. I'll speak to you again soon.
We will. Thanks. Take care.
Terry. Take care. Bye-bye. Right, you've been listening to Paranormal Dimensions. I'm David Young on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Paranormal Dimensions is as bright and powerful as our celestial star, the sun. And although it's expending thousands of pounds of energy every minute of the day, have no fear. There's plenty left.
Paranormal Dimensions is a regular feature on Mondays on the Paranormal UK radio network.